Many people know about the Anaconda Plan. Even if they don't know by name, most know something about the Union blockade of the Confederacy. Some attribute its continual attrition of the Confederacy with the Union's triumph, and also the prevention of a cornucopia of European nations eager to permanently stunt their rival in the West. At the time, the United States was still considered a developing nation, and it would have been detrimental to the country's future had it become subjugated to European interference during the critical times of the Civil War, and would have certainly altered the United States' future to be unrecognizable. However, these contributions to the Union's war effort and detriments to the Confederacies are awarded to the wrong navy. It wasn't the blue water navy of the open waves that won the Civil War for the North, but rather the little-known brown water navy of the rivers of the heartland that secured the reunification of the United States. The brown water navy roamed the plethora of American rivers in the Confederacy, and were very likely the reason for the Union's victory. They were the ones who assisted Grant in the capture of numerous forts and towns, including Fort Donelson, Fort Henry, and Vicksburg. The man behind the plan was U.S. General Winfield Scott, a general famous for his successes in the Mexican-American War, as well as his fair and equal treatment of the Mexican population in Mexico City after he had conquered it. He was nicknamed Old Fuss and Feathers for his strict adherence to the military traditions and customs. He was born on June 13th, 1786, and died on May 29th, 1866. His highest field rank was brevet lieutenant general. The only other American to have reached that rank at that time was George Washington. In Gary Joyner's book, Mr. Lincoln's Brownwater Navy, the Mississippi Squadron, it's shown how much of an impact the little studied and largely forgotten Brownwater Navy had upon the Civil War. The Union Island Navy that became the Mississippi Squadron is one of the greatest yet least studied aspects of the Civil War. Without it, however, the war in the West may not have been won, and the war in the East may have lasted much longer and perhaps ended differently. The men who formed and commanded this large fighting force have, with few exceptions, not been as thoroughly studied as their army counterparts. The vessels they created were highly specialized craft which operated in the narrow confines of the western rivers, in places that could not otherwise receive fire support. Ironclads and gunboats protected army forces and convoyed much needed supplies to far-flung federal forces. They patrolled thousands of miles of rivers and fought battles that were every bit as harrowing as land engagements, yet inside iron monsters that created stifling heat with little ventilation. The Anaconda Plan consisted of two main objectives. The first was to set up a naval blockade of the Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico ports that were controlled by the Confederacy. This was to cut off all trade to and from the rebellious states, and the second was to transport thousands of Union troops along with 20 or so gunboats down the Mississippi River. They would capture and hold towns along the way. This would cut the Confederacy in half because it would link up with the naval blockade once they had gotten to the delta of the Mississippi River, mainly New Orleans. The Union had captured New Orleans due to an oversight in defenses. The local Confederate forces were dead set on the Union attack coming from the north, so they positioned just about all of their defenses facing to the north. Not really overly presumptuous on their part, but unfortunately for the defenders, a Federal naval squadron to their south took advantage of the lack of southern-facing defenses and promptly captured New Orleans. So, as the Encyclopedia of American History explained it, not only had the Union closed the Confederacy's largest port, it had also acquired a suitable base for projecting military and naval power toward the southern interior. A major Union victory occurred. The fall of this critical financial and transportation hub was a major blow to the South. After securing New Orleans, the Union continued to move up the river. En route, they accepted the surrender of two other port cities, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and Natchez, Mississippi. James Buchanan Eads was born on May 23, 1820, and died on March 8, 1887. His mother's cousin was the president who is widely regarded as the worst president, at least according to John Green. He is the one who is responsible for the invention of the Union's brown water Navy gunboats. He also rapidly created 8 of the initial gunboats for the Union, using his own money to pay for the materials, the dock space, and the workers as well, to ensure speedy production for the Union.
Flag Officer Andrew Foote was born September 12, 1806, and died suddenly in New York, June 26, 1863. He assisted Ulysses S. Grant capture Fort Henry on February 6, 1862, and Fort Donelson on February 16, 1862, in a joint U.S. Navy and Army operation. The Brownwater Navy was hugely successful. It had also delayed Europe in interfering with the war itself and stopping Britain and France from seeing major victories from the south and seeing major victories from the north. It cut the South in half, and the success sped up the war rapidly and also destroyed Southern morale. Vicksburg was a massive blow to the South and also occurred at the same time as the Gettysburg defeat. Around 10 ironclads were built for the Union Brownwater Navy. The Cairo was built in 1861 and sunk on December 12, 1862. It hit a mine. The Essex was also built in 1861 but decommissioned in 1865. The Carondelet was built in 1861 and also decommed in 1865. The same with the Cincinnati and the Louisville. The Pittsburgh was built in 1862 and decommissioned in 1865. The St. Louis was built in 1862, but it hit a mine on June 13th in 1863, resulting in its destruction. The Benton was built in 1861 and was also decommissioned in 1865. The Eastport was captured from the Confederates in 1862, but it was blown up by the Union in 1864 to prevent it from falling back into their hands. Today, you can see the USS Cairo in the USS Cairo Museum in Mississippi. The wreck had been recovered by Edwin Bearse, Don Jacks, and Warren Grabow. They had started their search in 1956, and they had a reasonable guess as to its location in the river due to maps surviving from the Civil War. It was confirmed that they had discovered the location in 1959 when they had recovered armored port covers from the ship. In 1960, they had recovered the pilot house, an 8-inch smoothbore cannon, and the white oak carriage from the ship. The Yazoo River had deposited silt and mud upon the ship, so many of the artifacts were very well preserved and were able to be recovered. The hopes of lifting the Cairo out of the water intact were crushed, literally, by the 3-inch cables that were being used to lift the Cairo out of the water in October of 1964. At that point, they decided to cut the Cairo into 3 sections and salvage it that way. It worked. The armor that was recovered was removed, cleaned, and restored. The 2 engines that were recovered were taken apart, cleaned, and reassembled, and the sections of the hull were braced internally, and a sprinkler system was added to keep the white oak from warping and checking.
The Confederacy's combat effectiveness was reduced on account of the eventual efficiency of the Blue Water Navy's blockade, but by no measure was it the reason for the Union's triumph. In numerous cases, the all but forgotten Brownwater Navy had not only saved countless Union soldiers' lives, campaigns, and the reputation of Grant and multiple other generals, but also, without a doubt, it had saved the war for the Union, winning the West with Grant and also helping to win the East by delivering major blow after blow to the Confederacy in terms of capturing forts, defeating large bodies of troops, crushing morale in the West, and also causing the Confederacy to be split in half along the Mississippi. It has been stated by multiple historians that had the Brownwater Navy not existed or had not been used, today's maps might have CSA instead of USA on them.